Howdy men, this night we begin with something a little darker. A time of plagues, punishments, and pottage. We're diving into what existence became genuinely like throughout the center a long time. Forget the castles and chivalry Hollywood offered you. The truth, you possibly wouldn't final unmarried day. So, before you get relaxed, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you surely revel in what I do right here. And allow me recognize in the feedback where you are tuning in from, and what time it is for you. It's continually charming to look who's becoming a member of us from round the world. Now, dim the lighting, perhaps switch on a fan for that smooth background hum, and let's ease into this night's adventure collectively. Congratulations, you've got simply woken up inside the 12 months 1325. The good news, you are alive. The bad information, so are the fleas. Your bed is a half of rotted straw bed full of bugs, and hay that smells like a barn ground, as it became a barn floor 3 months ago. There may be no memory foam, no pillows, and absolutely no Egyptian cotton sheets. Only a wool blanket that hasn't been washed considering closing wintry weather, and now weighs roughly as plenty as a small cow from the collected filth. You blink conscious because the church bell clangs within the distance. It is the medieval version of an alarm clock, handiest louder, and one way or the other even much less merciful. Your property is a wooden hut with one room, no windows, and a captivating open-concept ground plan in which your own family, livestock, and home insects all share the identical space. The scent, oh, it is an aromatic symphony, a diffused combination of stale beer, human sweat, goat, and something you pray is not mold, but know in your soul likely is. Scented candles haven't been invented, and even in the event that they were, they just soften in your dirt ground. You try to stretch, but at once remorse it due to the fact the air is freezing and your joints pain. You are 22 years vintage, which in medieval phrases is kind of middle-aged. Your spine cacks like a vintage wood door, and your knees sound like a bag of rocks being shaken by way of a harassed peasant. Getting away from bed is a gamble. The ground is both moist from final night's rain, which leaks through the thatched roof, or crusty from something your neighbor's bird did. Either way, your bare toes are now a part of the atmosphere. Oh, and privateness. What's that? Your complete family, and perhaps a random cousin who simply in no way left are waking up beside you. There may be no bedroom, no curtains, no me time, simply communal the whole lot. Welcome to morning in medieval Europe, where you are never certainly on my own, due to the fact parasites, rodents, and 8 different humans are usually with you. And that is simply how your day starts off evolved. It handiest gets worse from right here. So you've got control to move slowly out of your medieval haystack of horrors. Congrats. Now, nature calls. And it's not calling cautiously. It's screaming. Here's the element in which you begin missing the modern-day lavatory. There is no toilet, no seat, no bathroom paper, no flush. Now not even a mildly envious plunger in the nook. Inside the 14th century, relieving yourself is an adventure, a social test, and often a small public event. In case you're a peasant, your toilet is probably a timber bucket at the back of the residence. That's already complete, because Uncle Wolf Stan had a difficult night time after consuming awful turnips. The odor is biblical. You preserve your breath, do your enterprise, after which right here's the kicker. Toss it into the street. Sure, the street. You are imagined to shout something like Gardaloo before dumping it out the window. That's antique French for be careful underneath. Although, frankly, nobody ever movements speedy enough. Streets in medieval cities are open sewers, a fascinating river of human waste, animal droppings, and mystery beverages you'll rather now not look at. In case you're lucky enough to stay in a city with public latrines, congratulations. You get to take a seat shoulder to shoulder with strangers in an outhouse wherein privacy is a myth and airflow is a merciless shaggy dog story. You may make small speak, however try no longer to respire too deeply. Lavatory paper, in no way heard of it. The majority wipe with straw, leaves, rags, moss, or if they're feeling specially indulgent, a scrap of wool. Occasionally nothing at all. Which may give an explanation for why handshakes weren't famous but. And if you're in a castle, actually it's higher, proper. Nicely. Kind of. You would possibly have a shield robe, a hole inside the wall that drops your waist without delay into the moat. Exquisite concept, except that your enemies understand this. And yes, attackers every now and then climbed in through the waste chute. Talk about coming into via the lower back door. So whether you are a farmer or a baron, medieval toileting is an embarrassment ritual. It's cold, it's public, it is dangerous, and it's never no longer disgusting. One slip on a whetstone direction, and you are face first in humanity's leftovers, and you continue to have not brushed your tooth. However, we'll get to that subsequent. You survived the restroom. You deserve a praise, right? Perhaps a pleasing breakfast. Something heat, scrumptious, comforting. Sorry, this is medieval Europe. Nothing is comforting right here. Breakfast, if you can name it that, is a grim affair. There are not any eggs, Benedict. No coffee machine sputtering awake. And without a doubt, no avocado toast. You sit down or squat close to the fire to a wooden bowl of something that seems like it was scraped off a muddy boot. Welcome to your each-day ration of pottage. Pottage is a thick, gloopy stew made of whatever you may locate. Grains, root veggies, maybe a few beans if you're lucky. It has been simmering in the same pot for days, once in a while weeks, and new ingredients are simply dumped on pinnacle of the vintage ones. It's much less of a recipe and greater of an ongoing suitable for eating experiment. At the side, a hunk of bread so tough it could deflect arrows. It's crafted from coarse rye or barley flour, regularly bulked up with sawdust, flour-up acorns, or different innovative substances, because wheat is a rich guy's fable. This loaf isn't your buddy. You do not slice it, you negotiate with it. What about liquids? You are now not sipping orange juice or an oat milk latte, you are consuming beer. Yes, beer. At 600 am. Why? Because the water is teeming with parasites and dirt. So you begin your day with susceptible ale, low alcohol, high survivability. Kids drink it too. No one's glad about it, but at the least it might not kill you right now. Need a few meat or cheese. Dream on. That is for Sundays and saints' banquet days. And simplest in case your lord is feeling beneficent. Most peasants do not devour meat a variety of times a year. As for clean fruit, handiest whilst it's in season, and no longer already fermented into wine, and do not even think about spices until you're royalty. A pinch of pepper fees greater than your monthly wages. Salt is treasured enough to be locked away, so that you bite your gritty bread, gulp your medieval beer, and strive no longer to consider the rat that could have nibbled your porridge inside the night time. Breakfast does not energize you. It simply happens to you. And now which you're nicely underfafed, it is time to work like your existence depends on it, as it sincerely does. So, you've got eaten your sad medieval breakfast, and now it is time to get dressed. Not that it'll help. Your dresser consists of exactly one outfit. One, it is a rough wool tunic or linen shift that you've worn each day for months, possibly years. There is no such element as seasonal fashion. There's just put on this until it disintegrates or offers you a fungal infection. Undies optional. In case you're fortunate, perhaps a linen beneath tunic. In case you're not, properly, you are going commando below layers of scratchy, sweaty wool, all lovingly stitched collectively by using a person who probably had no concept what a scene becomes speculated to appear to be. There's also no washing machine, no soap, and simply no dry purifier in sight. So your clothes are stained, stiff, and scented like a compost pile it has been left to marinate in a pigsty. Even in case you wanted to wash them, it is now not smooth. You'd need to haul water from a river, or, properly, warmth it over a hearth, scrub your tunic on a board with ashes or lye, and dangle it within the sun. That is out about 3 days a year. And don't get me began on footwear, in case you own any. They're manufactured from untreated leather, based, barely stitched collectively, and offer as lots arch aid as a banana peel. Most peasants simply pass barefoot via dust, through dung, via medieval landmines, aka sharp rocks and sickness puddles. All this indicates one factor. Your pores and skin hates you. You itch constantly. Fleas, lice, and bed bugs stay rent-free in your body. Anybody has them, nobles, awful priests. Itchy children, strolling insect farms. No person escapes. You will be scratching your armpit with a wood spoon even as chatting with the local priest. And nobody may also bat an eye fixed. Your skin is raw from rubbing. Your scalp a battlefield of bites. And if you develop a rash, well, too terrible. There is no dermatologist, no hydrocortisone, no one to tell you it is probably scabies. You just hold on struggling. And in case you're fortunate sufficient to no longer get in contamination, superb. That rash will truly accompany you for the following 6 months like an undesirable medieval sidekick. Now that you're dressed in misery and wrapped in pain, it's time to move outside and start working yourself to dying. Now which you're absolutely wearing itches and damp wool, it's time to flash that morning smile. Besides, you do not, because inside the middle a while, smiling is a risky recreation. Now not emotionally, dentally. There may be no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no floss. The concept of oral hygiene is about as famous as bathing. That's to say, no longer very. A few human beings might chunk on a sprig or rinse with wine or vinegar. However, for the most element, your enamel are on their own, and they are now not doing nicely. By the time you hit your mid-20s, your smile looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt. Cavities are rampant, gums are swollen, and people are not just food stains for your tooth. It's decay. You have extra rot for your mouth than a medieval root supplier. Sugar, whilst now not yet anywhere, is turning into extra commonplace many of the wealthy. Imported at first-rate value, mostly used in small desserts or to expose off wealth. In case you're a noble, congratulations. You get to rot your teeth faster than the peasants. In case you're bad, you will do it slowly over the years with fermented bread, gritty porridge, and years of hard chewing. Tooth ashes, get used to them. They're like medieval climate. Usually they're within the history. The form of pain that makes you don't forget praying, ingesting, or pulling the tooth out yourself with a couple of pliers. And that is no longer a joke. That become the actual remedy. Dentists didn't actually exist, but barber surgeons did. Sure. The identical man who cuts your hair is also pulling your murs out through candle light with an iron hook and zero anesthesia. Inflamed teeth. Wish you like fevers. Due to the fact without antibiotics, it may without problems turn into sepsis and kill you from a toothache. It really is proper. The identical thing that sends us to a pharmacy today may be your funeral within the 1300s. And there is no relief at the social the front either. Kissing, accurate good fortune. Halitosis, awful breath, is everywhere. In case you're single, you're not judged by way of your smile. You're judged by way of your land and your livestock. In quick, your mouth is a battlefield. And it's dropping the war. Now that your enamel are throbbing, let's head outside. Due to the fact your real activity, the only in order to wreck your returned, is simply getting commenced. Time to go to work. Besides, there's no office, no table, no espresso destroy, and no risk of advertising. Your task, if you're like 90% of the populace, is easy. Don't die while laboring for someone else's comfort. You are a peasant. Congratulations. Meaning you work the land that belongs to a lord, who likely doesn't remember your call. You upward push with the solar and stop handiest, while it disappears in the back of the timber. Your equipment, a wood hoe, a rusty sickle, and something bones are nevertheless intact to your body. There may be no weekend. There is no clocking out. There's only dawn to sunset. 6 days every week. Sunday is off, however best in case you're not harvesting, combating off raiders, or praying feverishly for your inflamed toe to forestall turning black. The paintings is brutal. Fields are ploughed by way of hand or with oxen, in case you're wealthy sufficient to have the funds for one. You dig ditches, stitch seeds, pull weeds, and deliver water until your spine begins to resemble the letter S. Nobody cares if you're tired. No person's asking how your mental health is doing. In case you're a female, wonder. You do not simply do subject work. You furthermore might care for youngsters. Easy cook dinner, spin wool, feed animals. And fox, your husband's lice infestation isn't slowly migrating in your facet of the bed. Youngsters, they begin helping out round age 5. No college, no toys, just a tiny timber rake. And a dream of at some point not demise of the flu. And in case you're one of the few who isn't always a farmer, maybe you're a blacksmith, a tanner, or a cooper, awesome. You continue to work with hearth, chemical substances, or animal guts all day in poorly ventilated sheds. The pay, basically survival. The perks, occasional bleeding, wreck a bone. Too terrible. Get a fever, drink a few heat beer and maintain going. You can't find the money to prevent, not even for a day. Because if you don't work, you don't devour. And if you don't eat properly, medieval Europe has an answer for that. It is known as being changed. So, you grip your shovel, ignore the blisters, and preserve digging. Due to the fact inside the middle a while, your process isn't always a profession. It's a sluggish movement staying power check. Now that your returned is on fire from laboring in the fields, permits communicate approximately the weather. Due to the fact inside the Middle Ages, temperature is much less about seasons and greater approximately ongoing punishment from the sky. Permits start with wintry weather. There's no insulation, no vital heating, and no weathering. Just wood partitions with gaps you could throw a chook via. Your windows protected with cloth, now not glass. The fireplace in the hearth first. Rate in theory. However, you don't have enough firewood to keep it going due to the fact timber is high-priced, and gathering it from the woodland is now and again unlawful. Yes, you could be finished for picking up the wrong stick from the wrong woodland. You package deal up in your one damp wool tunic, huddle near the dying embers, and nonetheless awaken along with your nostril frozen, your toes permanently cold, often damp, your hands so stiff they feel like tiny medieval popsicles. Frostbite is not diagnosed. It's just referred to as awful good fortune. Now fast ahead to summer season. Sounds higher proper. Wrong. In summer season, your private home will become a clay oven. There is no fan, no go breeze, and definitely no deodorant. You sweat through your layers. However, you cannot dispose of them due to the fact displaying too much skin is scandalous and also invites sunburn, insect bites, and social judgment. The flies are out in full force, attracted to your unwashed frame and the odor of closing week's goat stew that is still fermenting within the nook. Mosquitoes buzz via your ear whilst you sleep, assuming you can sleep via the sound of your friends yelling and babies crying. In the fields, the sun bakes you. No sunblock, no hat, except you normal one out of straw like a desperate scarecrow. And the worst part, you continue to ought to paintings. Warmth stroke is simply referred to as taking a bad turn. So, you're either shivering to your personal avail, thinking if your theft will make it to spring, or you're sweating through your only pair of socks at the same time as your thighs chafe into oblivion. And the one aspect that by no means modifications, regardless of the season, your garments nevertheless itch, your food continues to be terrible, and your subsequent job still ready. Welcome to climate manage, medieval style. There is none. Feeling thirsty? Want to clean up? Want to splash a little water for your face to awaken from this damp fever dream of a life? Too awful. In medieval times, water is not your buddy. It's trying to homicide you quietly. Allows begin with ingesting. The nearby flow seems clean, bubbling, and clean like something out of a fantasy movie. But spoiler alert, it's no longer. Upstream, a person just dumped a chamber pot into it. And if now not that, then a useless pig might be decomposing in it. Parasites, microorganism, and the whole microbial military of medieval Europe watching for in every sip. It is why people drank beer. Yes, beer, even children. But before you consider medieval youngsters doing keg stands, take into account that it became small beer, weak in alcohol, sturdy in survival. Brewing boiled the water, so it becomes safer than something flowed through the town ditch. Wine was any other alternative if you were rich sufficient to come up with the money for it, and unconcerned with functioning nicely earlier than midday. What approximately bathing? Sincerely, water became used for cleaning. In theory, yes. In exercise, in reality now not. See lower back then. Human beings believed bathing certainly opened your pores and allow the disorder in. That is proper. Washing yourself turned into considered medically risky. You were purifier apparently in case you in no way eliminated the protective layer of dirt caked onto your skin. Communal baths did exist, however they quick won reputations as locations for gossip, scandal, and once in a while complete, on medieval extracurriculars. So, certainly, the church were given concerned and close many down. Even if you did need to wash, it become a full production. You'd need to fetch water from the well, boil it over a fire, fill a wood bath that leaked, and then pray nobody else inside the house used it before you, or worse, after. And rainwater gathered in open barrels in which birds poop, insects breed, and moss thrives. Sounds clean, would not it? So whether or not it's getting into your mouth, to your body, or onto your plants, water inside the center a while is much less of a existence supply and greater of a gamble. One incorrect gulp, and you are spending your final days sweating in a straw bed, clutching your stomach and thinking of all of your life choices. Subsequent time you sip faucet water, improve a pitcher for our ancestors. They did not have the luxurious of hydration without risk, so that you drank the water. Or maybe you didn't. Perhaps you just stubbed your toe on a rock shaped like sadness. Either way, you are unwell. You want help. You need a doctor. Too awful you live within the Middle Ages wherein remedy is actually just well-mannered torture with a theology diploma. Allows begin with the prognosis. The whole thing wrong with you, whether or not it's a cough, rash, damaged bone, or the creeping plague, is because of your humours being out of stability. The four humours had been blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to medieval technological know-how, your health relies on maintaining them balanced, like some form of inner soup. Got a fever, an excessive amount of blood. The solution, bloodletting, it is right, allows drain your life force into a bowl, the usage of a stupid blade or a hungry leech. And yes, barbers were frequently the ones doing it. Consider getting a haircut and a hemoglobin extraction in one sitting, for one infant. Feeling sad or anxious, that is virtually an extra of black bile. The cure, laxatives. Perhaps a warm herbal purge or just prayers and a cold compress at the same time as anyone avoids eye contact with you and starts carving your coffin. Now, in case you ruin a bone or get an uncongenial wound, you are in real hassle. There's no anesthesia until you count passing out from ache. Surgical treatment is completed with knives that have not been cleaned since the Crusades. Tools are heated over fire, now not for sterilization, however, because they simply look scarier that manner. Antibiotics centuries away. Germ principle no longer invented, but they suppose sickness comes from terrible air or God being aggravated together with your ethical failings. Were given a stomach ache, ought to have been your sinful thoughts. Desire you want confessing even as vomiting. In case your circumstance receives worse, you'll be dealt with more leeches, possibly some overwhelmed beetles, and a clergyman at your bedside giving remaining rites just in case. At this factor, they're getting ready for the cure known as demise. And if with the aid of some miracle, you get better, all and sundry simply assumes God took pity on you. The health practitioner takes complete credit score, and the leech receives promoted. So yes, within the middle a long time, medicine is much less about recovery and extra approximately surviving the treatment. After a long day of exertions, lice, and leeches, it's subsequently time to consume. You shuffle returned in your hivel, stomach growling, prepared for the only joy left in lifestyles, a warm meal. Awful information. Your meal is probably looking to kill you. Allows start with the basics. Meals maintenance does not truly exist. There is no refrigerator, no freezer, just salt, smoke, or the hope that wintry weather air maintains things sparkling. Your meat, if you're lucky enough to have any, has been putting for days, protected in flies, marinated in questionable brine, and probably shared with a rat or two. Bread is the cornerstone of the medieval food regimen. But even that is not safe. In bad harvest years, determined peasants bulk it up with bark, sawdust, or maybe clay to make it stretch. And if it is rye season, there's an advantage. Ergot, a fungus that causes convulsions, hallucinations, and occasionally demise. It's like consuming bread laced with LSD and tetanus. Vegetables, handiest if they may be in season. And you already know what is continually in season. Turnips. So many turnips. Boiled, mashed, or floating in pottage, which, in case you recall from Bankruptcy 3, is basically a hot swamp of mystery substances. This has been simmering on the grounds that your excellent grandfather's funeral. Fruit is probably to be had within the fall, but it rots quick, and sugar is rare, expensive, and hoarded through the rich to expose off their blackened tooth. Dairy is another gamble. Clean milk spoils in hours. Butter and cheese fare higher. However, they are loaded with bacteria. Human beings devour them besides, because frankly it is either that or chunk your boot leather, based, and permit speak about seasoning. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg, really worth greater than gold. For the average peasant, taste comes from onions, salt, if you're lucky, an ache. Most food flavor like moist burlap sprinkled with unhappiness. However, meals isn't always only a health danger, it is a political one. Recreation animals belong to the Lord, no longer you. Stuck poaching a rabbit, you may be fined, imprisoned, or maybe accomplished. That's proper. Your dinner should get you hanged. So, as you sit down all the way down to devour your grey stew with the aid of flickering fireplace mild, consider each bite is a hazard. But you consume anyway. Due to the fact in the center a long time, food doesn't nourish. It checks you. It is nighttime now. You've labored, suffered, and barely digested your suspicious stew. You might think the day is winding down. However, don't get too comfortable, due to the fact God is looking. So is the priest, and so is your neighbor Agnes, who will certainly rat you out if you miss Mass. In medieval Europe, religion isn't just part of existence. It is life. The church controls your calendar, your laws, your schooling, if you may read, your beginning, marriage, loss of life, and the whole thing in among. Think of it as your non-secular landlord, and you're continually behind on rent. Each day is established round prayer bells. The city church bell rings inside the morning, noon, and night, no longer because people want reminders, but due to the fact missing prayer is a sin. Neglect to bow. Sin. Consume meat on a Friday. Sin. Reflect on consideration on your neighbor's spouse in that one dream. Double sin. And yes, hell may be very actual, vividly actual. Priests describe it in wonderful element. Rivers of fireplace, lakes of boiling blood, demons with pitchforks, and eternal wailing. If the plague does not scare you, eternal damnation honestly will. You cannot read the Bible yourself because it's written in Latin, a language reserved for clergymen, clergy, and that one noble youngster who is too true for dirt. You rely upon the church to interpret the whole lot for you. Which means if the priest says your crop failure is due to the fact you did not pray tough enough, nicely, time to kneel tougher. Teethers, 1/10 of everything you own, are mandatory. If you develop wheat, you give wheat. If you raise chickens, you supply eggs. When you have not anything, congratulations. You are spiritually bankrupt and financially doomed. Holidays, they're holy days. Dozens of them. And even as they offer breaks from exertions, they're no longer for fun. Consequently, attending Mass, fasting, confessing sins, and reminding yourself that pleasure is a dangerous indulgence. Thinking the church is dangerous, heretics are burned, witches are drowned, blasphemers are flogged, and skeptics are quick reformed. So that you go through the motions, you chant, you bow, you pray that your soul, after enduring this dirt-covered life, might sooner or later land in paradise, assuming the priest likes you. Because within the Middle Ages, God can be merciful, but the church no longer so much. In case your idea being a medieval peasant became rough, attempt doing it as a lady. All of the dust, famine, and worry, plus childbirth, subservience, and social invisibility. Inside the middle a long time, being a lady is like being on hard mode without a fitness potions and no restart button. From birth, a woman's lifestyles course is pretty a good deal locked in. Marry younger, undergo youngsters, serve your husband, die tired. Education no longer likely. Until you're from a noble-owned family and sent to a convent, your intellectual development stops around the time you discover ways to churn butter and patch a tunic. Marriage occurs early. Certainly early. It's not bizarre to be betrothed at 12 and pregnant by 14. It is no longer approximately love. It is about land, farm animals, and alliances. Your opinion not required. As soon as married, you are essentially your husband's property. Your task is to produce heirs, feed all of us, hold the house jogging, and not whinge. Due to the fact complaining might get you branded a nag or worse, a witch. That label comes with a complimentary drowning or burning, depending on neighborhood style. Infant delivery is a dying lottery. There's no prenatal care, no sterile gear, no anesthesia. Midwives do their great, but even minor headaches can suggest loss of life for the mom, the kid, or each. Some ladies continue to exist 10 pregnancies. Many do not survive too. However, don't worry, once the baby is out, your work increases. Now you have a screaming toddler in a lice-ridden hut, and you are anticipated to nurse, prepare dinner, clean, and nonetheless help inside the fields. You don't get a ruin. You are the ruin for absolutely everyone else. In case you're unmarried, you're suspicious. If you're widowed, vulnerable. If you're outspoken, dangerous. Ladies who failed to conform were regularly accused of witchcraft, mainly in the event that they had herbal know-how, a robust personality, or simply checked out someone funny on a wet Tuesday. Even in the church, your position is limited. Nuns lived beneath strict guidelines. No speaking without permission. No freedom of motion, and your spiritual worth, usually ranked below men. In brief, if you're a girl inside the Middle Ages, you're predicted to undergo, obey, reproduce, and go through in silence, ideally even as smiling. Because even in a time of time, honored struggling, women have become what may expected to suffer gracefully. Thus far, you've battled dust, starvation, social injustice, and possibly a goat. However simply, while you suppose your day cannot get any worse, here comes violence. Loud, bloody, and regularly completely suited by medieval requirements. Allows be clean, the middle a while had been now not peaceful. The concept of law and order generally supposed hope the nearby lord isn't in an awful temper. Violence is anywhere. Inside the home, within the streets, on the battlefield, in church disputes, and every now and then in line at the communal bread oven. Crime is not unusual, punishment is brutal, and justice is greater performance art than protection. Steal a loaf of bread, you may lose a hand, accused of lying, your tongue might get pierced, gossip an excessive amount of, meet the scold's bridle, a metal mask strapped in your head with a bar for your mouth. For correction of path, let's consider you are accused of something critical. Heresy, theft, witchcraft. How do you show your innocence? By using being tortured, manifestly. Welcome to trial by ordeal. One model, you stick your hand in boiling water to retrieve a stone. If it heals without contamination in 3 days, you're harmless. If no longer you're guilty, some other choice, you are tossed into a river. If you sink, you are innocent and possibly useless. If you flow, you're responsible and could be punished anyway. It is like a medieval game show, where the prize is survival and the host is actively rooting towards you. And if you're sentenced to loss of life, that is a public occasion. Executions are done in front of cheering crowds, hangings, beheadings, burnings. From time to time humans convey snacks. It is the medieval equivalent of cable television. Domestic violence completely regular. Husbands had been allowed, even predicted, to subject their wives and kids. Road fights common vicinity. You could be beaten just for looking the incorrect manner at a noble's horse. And warfare continually simmering. Local feuds, territorial disputes, religious crusades. Someone's constantly marching off to stab someone else within the call of honor, God, or boredom. Violence isn't a breakdown of society within the middle a long time. It is society. Everybody lives with the constant know, how that existence is fragile, justice is unfair, and your neighbor would possibly bash your head in over a pig. So, walk cautiously, keep your eyes down, and in no way believe absolutely everyone with a club. At this factor, you've got made it through the lice, the leeches, the laundryless distress, and the looming chance of public disembowelment. But now comes the final chapter of maximum medieval lives, an early and unglamorous loss of life. In case you're alive and nonetheless respiratory beyond the age of 40, you're almost a movie star. You might even be known as the Old One. That's less of a nickname and extra of a statistical miracle. Permits damage it down. The average lifestyle's expectancy hovers round 30-40 years. However, that range is dragged down closely by little one mortality. Almost half of all kids died earlier than reaching age 5, ailment, malnutrition, or one terrible winter turned into all it took. No vaccines, no antibiotics, no wish. If you survived childhood, you entered maturity already exhausted. Work commenced as quickly as you may stroll upright, and via 25, your joints creaked like a monastery door. You is probably lacking numerous enamel, a finger, and most of your unique optimism. Women faced a specifically deadly gauntlet, childbirth. It was one of the leading causes of death for medieval women. No pain comfort, no clinical intervention, simply prayer, hot water, and someone holding your hand whilst you bled out on a straw-crammed cot. For men, the dangers had been different, however equally relentless. Farming injuries, infections from minor wounds, a neighbor's drunken rage, a campaign long gone sideways. Even taking walks to the marketplace will be risky if you crossed paths with a bored bandit or an indignant tax collector. Loss of life may also come quietly from the plague, which became cities into cemeteries in a single day, or from famine, that can closing entire seasons, thinning out whole villages, or from awful success, like consuming spoiled grain and spending your very last hours hallucinating and screaming on the partitions. And funerals, you have been fortunate if you acquire one. Our bodies were often buried fast to keep away from disorder. No embalming, no polished coffins, just a hole, some murmured prayers, and a shallow mound of earth, if there was enough area left inside the churchyard. So yes, in medieval times, lifestyles was brutal, short, and constantly underneath siege by using dying in all its casual forms. You didn't retire. You just stop displaying up, and talking of exits, allows circulate on your final chapter. The medieval dream dies. So, how's your day been? You've got woken up in grime, relieved yourself into a bucket, brushed your tooth with wishful wondering, nearly passed out from starvation, worked till your backbone cried for mercy, scratched your way through itchy wool, prayed to now not get plague, and barely dodged a public execution for proudly owning a squirrel. Welcome to an unmarried day in medieval Europe, nonetheless dreaming of becoming a knight. Assume once more that romanticized version of the Middle Ages, gallant swordsmen, noble girls in towers, heroic battles and feasts in candle-lit exceptional halls. It's a delusion polished by fairy stories and fable books. In fact, the medieval global turned into gritty, cruel, and deeply unfair. Hierarchy changed into the entirety. If you were born negative, you stayed bad. If you were born rich, congratulations. You had a better hazard of surviving. But you have been nevertheless one terrible soup away from dysentery and a hasty burial. Even the nobles weren't proof against distress. Castles have been drafty stone fridges full of fleas, smoke, and politically motivated marriages. Positive, you had a fur cloak and a goblet of wine. However, additionally a 50% threat of death in a skirmish or from an inflamed splinter. No longer exactly luxurious, the simpler instances were not easy. They were relentless. The whole thing took longer. The whole lot harm more. Everything from childbirth to chewing came with consequences. Existence was survival, not leisure. And if you did find a quiet moment to think, to dream, to imagine something better, there wasn't a good deal you could do with it. No upward mobility, no contemporary medicinal drug, no internet to Google. What is this weird rash? You lived, suffered, worked, and died inside a 10-mile radius of where you were born. However, here's the wildest component. Via all of this, human beings nevertheless laughed, sang songs, advised tales, fell in love, and determined which means. Now, not due to the fact life turned into easy. However, because human beings are cussed like that. Even within the darkest chapters, they made area for mild. So tonight, whilst you slip into your clean mattress with indoor plumbing, antibiotics and valuable heating, maybe say a quiet thank you to the modern-day world and to your ancestors who fought rats, famine, and feudalism, so that you wouldn't should. Long earlier than she become Catherine the Super, Empress of all Russia, mistress of reform, and icon of ambition, she changed into genuinely Sophie. Born Sophie Federica Augusta von Anheuslust in 1729, she was the daughter of an incredibly difficult-to-understand German princely family. Her tiny Dutch in Pomerania provided little in terms of power, but Sophie herself, she had something no name could offer. Razor-sharp intelligence, relentless appeal, and a quiet, burning hunger for greatness. Her upbringing turned into strict. Her mom, Johanna, turned into bloodless and calculating, not a heat, nurturing figure. However, a social climber captivated with status. Sophie's father, a Prussian officer, become more distant than disciplinary. From a young age, Sophie learned to walk the exceptional line among obedience and foxy. She read voraciously, spoke multiple languages, and learned a way to take a look at a room earlier than speak me in it. Skills that could quickly end up survival equipment in one in every of Europe's maximum brutal courts. While the Russian Empress Elizabeth Petrona commenced looking for a spouse for her inheritor, Grand Duke Peter, she appeared beyond Russia's borders. Peter himself was of German descent, and Empress Elizabeth believed overseas bride, pliable and thankful, might be less complicated to govern. Sophie enshaped the invoice flawlessly. Noble blood, Lutheran faith, which she'd be pressured to desert, and a reputation for each grace and humility. At just 14 years old, Sophie changed into summoned to Russia. She arrived in the freezing capital of St. Petersburg in 1744, carrying thin German fabric and a diplomatic smile. Her mom driven her ahead like a chess piece. Sophie, but had her personal sport in mind. To come to be suitable in Russian society, she converted to orthodoxy, taking the call Ekaterina Alexa, Catherine. The rite became public, symbolic, and life-altering. She wasn't simply converting religions. She became burning the bridge in the back of her, moving into an overseas empire without a way lower back. Nobody looking that quiet teenage lady in a fur-trimmed coat should have expected what might come next. Betrayal, revolution, enlightenment, and empire. But from the moment Sophie stepped foot inside the Russian court docket, she stopped being a pawn and commenced making plans, how to turn out to be a queen. Catherine's marriage to Grand Duke Peter becomes supposed to relax her region in Russian royalty, but from the very starting, it felt extra like a cage than a crown. Peter, inheritor to the Russian throne, become now not the speeding prince of fairy tales, awkward, immature, and captivated with toy squaddies. He was far more interested in playing war games in his chambers than governing an empire or displaying affection to his new wife. A few money-owed even recommend he refused to consummate the marriage for years. He idolized Frederick the Tremendous of Prussia and resented the Russian court docket that had followed him. In evaluation, Catherine embraced Russia with a fierce willpower. She learned the language, studied its records, and memorized Orthodox rituals. She desired to belong. Peter desired to break out. This mismatch wasn't just emotional. It turned into political. The Russian courtroom became a viper's nest of gossip, paranoia, and brutal strength games. Empress Elizabeth nevertheless ruled with absolute authority, but her health became in decline. Everybody knew a transition become coming, and all of us had a schedule. Catherine turned into watch continuously. Her letters were read, her friendships monitored, and her every circulate scrutinized. She couldn't agree with her husband, her mother, who became nonetheless whispering in her ear on behalf of overseas hobbies or even her servants. On this global, alliances could grow to be accusations in a single day. But Catherine turned into no idiot. She found out to play the courtroom's video games quietly, cultivating allies inside the shadows. She charmed military officials, made pals with students, and developed a recognition for dignity and discretion, a stark assessment to her husband's infantile tantrums and open contempt for Russian traditions. Behind closed doorways, Catherine began studying Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Montesquieu. While others noticed her as a younger consort, she was building a imaginative and prescient, not just for herself, however, for Russia, a state of electricity, schooling, and cause. However, there was one hassle. The longer Peter lived, the longer Catherine remained in limbo, a powerless wife to a man not worthy to rule. So she waited, determined, and deliberate. She knew the Russian throne would not be inherited, it'd need to be taken. In 1762, after nearly decades of ready, looking, and quietly maneuvering, Catherine noticed her second, and seized it with breathtaking precision. Empress Elizabeth had died, and Peter, now Peter III, was in the end Tsar. However, his reign began unraveling nearly right now. In just a few quick months, Peter alienated the church, indignant the nobility, insulted the army, and lavished praise on Prussia, Russia's longtime enemy. He reversed key rules, humiliated the clergy, and talked overtly approximately divorcing Catherine to marry his mistress. The court docket, already wary of his erratic behavior, grew to become bloodless. The military, filled with generals unserving to Catherine, grumbled in corridors. Even regular Russians, devout and patriotic, noticed Peter as a foreign puppet who mocked their traditions. Catherine, looking all of this unfold, made her pass. In July of that equal year, whilst Peter turned into away at his summer season palace, Catherine launched a bloodless coup d'etat. Supported with the aid of key navy officers, which includes her lover, Gregory Olaf, and his influential brothers, she rode through St. Petersburg in full regalia, become proclaimed Empress Catherine Tyre, and won the allegiance of the powerful imperial defend. Peter stuck off protect and without allies surrendered inside days. He became taken into custody and shortly after located dead beneath mysterious instances. Formally, it became said as a hemorrhoidal colic. Unofficially, it changed into homicide. Catherine changed into now Empress. Now not by way of beginning, not by means of marriage, but via will, wit, and audacity. It turned into exceptional. A foreign-born female with no legitimate claim had taken the Russian throne without unmarried warfare, but her actual project turned into just beginning. She needed to transform that formidable grasp for energy into a long-lasting legacy. Could Russia take delivery of her? Could the aristocracy respect her? May want to she hold the empire collectively, without falling sufferer to the identical destiny as her husband? Catherine understood that power gained via intrigue will be misplaced simply as without difficulty. She needed to rule no longer as a schemer, however, as a visionary, and so commenced her transformation from a careful conspirator to a reforming empress, one who might redraw borders, include the Enlightenment, and redefine what it meant to be a girl in power, Once Catherine had the crown, she may want to have rested on her power. However, she failed to. She had something bigger in thoughts than really sitting on a throne. She desired to convert Russia, and no longer simply militarily or politically, however intellectually. At the same time as Peter had worshipped Frederick the Splendid and toy soldiers, Catherine idolized Voltaire, Diderot, and the bold thinkers of the Enlightenment. She believed in reason, development, training, and the role of a monarch as a servant of the human beings, even supposing she herself ruled with absolute authority. Catherine didn't just study Enlightenment philosophy, she lived it. She corresponded without delay with Voltaire for over 15 years, flattering him even as protecting her autocracy. She invited Diderot to her court and even purchased his whole library to aid him financially. At the back of closed doors, she pored over prison texts, debated reforms, and crafted rules to modernize the empire. Her early reign was packed with efforts to codify Russian regulation. She shaped the legislative fee in 1767, a bold mission intended to rewrite the entire legal code of Russia. Catherine's personal nakazas or practice was a political manifesto in conceal, one that talked about equality before the law, the dangers of torture, and the responsibility of rulers to serve the common true. For an empress in 18th century Russia, it became radical. However, Enlightenment beliefs needed to live on the realities of Russia, a considerable, feudal, deeply conservative land ruled by nobles who liked their serfs precisely where they were, beneath them. Catherine knew this. While she encouraged reform, she moved carefully. She abolished a few varieties of torture, multiplied get right of entry to secular training, and built faculties and libraries. But she additionally reaffirmed that the aristocracies manage over their serfs to preserve them unserving. This was Catherine's balancing act. A philosopher queen in public, a realistic empress in non-public. She walked a decent rope among ideology and survival, among the shining salons of Paris and the gritty politics of Moscow. Her vision for Russia became ambitious, however continually calculated. In lots of ways, Catherine wasn't trying to make Russia equal. She became looking to make Russia current on her terms. And that supposed reform, yes, however with an iron hand in a velvet glove. Catherine wasn't content with reforming Russia from within. She wanted to make bigger it outward, to make it an empire worth of worry, admiration, and envy. Wherein Peter the Fantastic had opened a window to the west, Catherine aimed to knock down the walls. Beneath her leadership, Russia's borders stretched wider than ever earlier then. She waged wars no longer simply to defend her crown, but to reshape the map of Europe. One of her most massive campaigns changed into in opposition to the Ottoman Empire. These wars, fought in waves in the course of the 1760s and 1770s, were not pretty much territory. They have been about effect. Catherine saw herself as the liberator of Orthodox Christians dwelling under Muslim rule, and because the rightful protector of Japanese Europe. Under generals like Alexander Suvorov and Gregory Pumpkin, Russia captured key regions together with Crimea, the northern coast of the Black Sea, and access to heat water ports, something Russian czars had coveted for generations. These victories weren't just army, they have been symbolic. With every conquest, Catherine sent a message. Russia was not the remote backward cousin of Europe. It became a continental pressure. She also became her gaze westward. In a sequence of offers and diplomatic maneuvers, Catherine participated inside the walls of Poland, carving up the struggling Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth at the side of Austria and Prussia. With the aid of the cease of the 1.3 partition in 1795, Poland became erased from the map and Russia claimed considerable new lands and hundreds of thousands of latest subjects. But Catherine failed to simply triumph over with armies. She additionally colonized with ideas. New towns were constructed. Exchange routes have been expanded. German settlers were invited to domesticate Russian farmland. The empire became a mosaic from the icy Baltic to the sun-drenched shorelines of the Black Sea. And via all of it, Catherine remained the relevant pressure, reading reviews, issuing orders, and for my part overseeing the form of her increasing empire. Critics would accuse her of being electricity-hungry, even imperialistic. However, to Catherine, expansion wasn't ambition. It changed into destiny. A superb ruler, she believed, changed into measured no longer just via ideas, but by using borders. She failed to just need to rule Russia. She desired to remake it as a civilized empire, feared by means of its enemies, respected by means of its friends, and loyal to her on my own. For all her brilliance and energy, Catherine the Amazing turned into just as well known for what went on behind palace doors. And no, now not all of it was whispered in libraries. Catherine's personal lifestyles have become one of the most talked about elements of her reign. She had fanatics, not just one or, however, a carefully curated parade of them, many years more youthful, frequently handsome, and once in a while politically influential. She didn't cover them. In reality, she often rewarded them with titles, estates, and pensions if they behaved well. If no longer, they have been quietly disregarded, from time to time with a well-mannered thanks and advertising. Most of the maximum essential of those enthusiasts became Gregory Pempkin, a person as extremely good as he turned into bold. Their dating blurred the lines among romance, politics, and partnership. A few historians agree with they may have even married in mystery. Together, they fashioned military campaigns, colonization initiatives, and the transformation of southern Russia. Pempkin wasn't just a lover. He changed into her co-ruler in many approaches. Still, Europe could not look past the scandal. Gossip swirled. Satirical pamphlets painted her as lustful, insatiable, even unhinged. And after her loss of life, the rumors best got worse. The maximum notorious being the completely fake and gruesome tale concerning a horse unfolded by way of her enemies to smear her legacy. However, why the obsession? Simple. Catherine was a female who wielded electricity unapologetically. And in an international in which girl rulers were predicted to be both saintly virgins or tragic figures, she refused to play the function. She lived, cherished, and dominated on her very own terms, and that made her dangerous. Mockingly. At the same time as her critics painted her as immoral, Catherine herself turned into deeply philosophical about love and sexuality. She believed pleasure became a herbal a part of life, and that private relationships didn't have to threaten public duty. She separated emotion from governance, a feat few male rulers managed. In truth, her liaison had been frequently strategic. She surrounded herself with guys who had been unserving, capable, and politically useful. And once they ceased to be, she let them cross, normally with a smile and a generous retirement. Catherine's love lifestyles didn't weaken her rule. It became part of her strategy, a blend of passion and power that made her unforgettable, envied, and feared. For all her aura and manipulate, Catherine's reign became no longer without peril. And in 1773, that peril came in the shape of a bearded Cossack named Ilan Pugachev. He became no regular revolt. Pugachev claimed to be none aside from Peter III, Catherine's useless husband. In step with him, he had survived the coup, and now again to reclaim the throne from the German usurper. It turned into absurd. Peter became long past, but to Russia's oppressed and exhausted decreased lessons, the declare did not need to be authentic. It simply needed to provide wish. Pugachev promised liberation and stopped to serfdom, lower taxes, and land for the not unusual human beings. His phrases lit a fireplace throughout the Volga River area, mainly amongst Saxe peasants and vintage believers. In a time when the space between nobles and serfs had widened brutally, his promises gave the impression of salvation. The Pugachev rebel have become the largest peasant rebellion in Russian records. Towns have been taken, fortresses fell, nobles had been slaughtered. For a terrifying moment, it appeared as though the empire itself may fracture. Catherine was shaken. This wasn't an overseas battle she may want to win with cavalry and treaties. This changed into a rebellion from within her own humans, rising in opposition to the system. She ruled. But Catherine didn't panic. She acted. She dispatched professional military forces to crush the rebellion ruthlessly. Pugachev's forces were defeated in 1774. He changed into captured, displayed in an iron cage, and in the end beheaded in Moscow, a public warning to all who dared comply with. In a while, Catherine doubled down on order and manage. Her desires of freeing the serfs quietly faded into silence. The rebellion had proven her the boundaries of enlightenment in a country nevertheless shackled by feudalism. She now leaned more difficult on the aristocracy, who supplied loyalty in change for absolute control over their serfs. This changed into a turning factor. The empress who once quoted Voltaire now prioritized balance over philosophy. Reform became careful. Surveillance multiplied. Insurrection, even whispered, become to be stomped out earlier than it had breath. Pugachev can also have misplaced his head, but he left in the back of a caution that haunted Catherine. That electricity constructed on inequality could most effective hold "see you later" earlier than the storm got here crashing through. By the time Catherine the Brilliant approached the final years of her lifestyles, she had ruled Russia for over a long time, longer than any female ruler in Russian records. From the instant she seized electricity, she had defied expectations, reshaped her empire, and redefined what a girl and a monarch will be. Underneath Catherine's reign, Russia became a real European powerhouse. Its territory extended by means of over 200,000 rectangular miles, swallowing Crimea, parts of Poland, and stretches of the Black Beach. These weren't simply military wins. They were strategic pivots, securing heat water ports and reshaping Alternate. But her legacy wasn't most effective drawn on maps. Catherine left a cultural mark as well. She helped observe the Hermitage Museum, amassed one of the greatest artwork collections in Europe, and corresponded with the best minds of the Enlightenment. Her court have become a middle of sophistication, art, and intellectual ambition. In a country often considered as backward by way of Western Europeans, Catherine positioned Russia firmly at the cultural map. She modernized training, founding faculties for ladies, and promoted the printing of books. She delivered smallpox inoculation to Russia, even publicly receiving the vaccine herself, an act of clinical bravery in her time. Yet, her reign became also certainly one of contradictions. While she well liked Enlightenment beliefs, she in no way freed the serfs. In reality, she prolonged serfdom deeper into Russia's territories. Her reforms, even as fantastic, remained in most cases pinnacle down, designed to shine the empire without in reality remodeling its foundations. Nevertheless, Catherine's rule delivered balance and ambition. She understood that strength was now not inherited. It became crafted, controlled, and constantly defended. She ruled not through divine proper, but with the aid of force of will, political brilliance, and incessant calculation. She was called many stuff: a person, a tyrant, a reformer, a seductress, but mainly she was powerful. When she died in 1796, Russia turned into wealthier, large and greater ambitious than it had been in centuries. She left behind a throne at ease, an empire improved, and a legend that would undergo for hundreds of years. Catherine failed to just reign. She dominated with mind, method, and an unapologetic grip on records. And in doing so, she became greater than an empress. She became a fable. For all her strength, growth, and enduring legacy, Catherine the Superb became nonetheless at her center a girl navigating a man's world and reshaping it in her image. At the back of the imperial photos and country decrees changed into someone deeply privy to how precarious her position turned into. She became no longer born Russian. She came to the throne via a coup. She dominated an empire that did not need a woman in price. And yet she now not simplest continued, she thrived. Catherine was never content to be decorative. She read constantly, wrote endlessly, and by no means stopped learning. Her daily timetable was excessive, hours of reading reports, corresponding with overseas powers, editing kingdom papers, and coping with a court packed with rival factions. She wasn't content to definitely take a seat on the throne. She labored the throne like a stateswoman born to it. She turned into also, in lots of approaches, lonely. She surrounded herself with courtiers, lovers, and artists, but wrote in her memoirs of how few human beings she could simply accept as true with. Her son Paul, whom she distrusted and kept far away from country topics, grew into a person she feared would undo all her development. Her best emotional partnership with Gregory Pemkin faded into deep friendship, but his dying in 1791 left a wound that in no way in reality healed. Catherine crafted her photo carefully. She understood the power of narrative and wielded it higher than maximum monarchs of her age. She posed as mother of Russia, enlightened monarch, warrior, empress, and lover of the arts. But below those roles became a girl who had persisted rejection, betrayal, scandal, and rebellion and kept going. While she died in 1796, she left in the back of an empire converted, however also questions. May want to she have performed more to stop serfdom? Have been her Enlightenment ideals compromised by politics? Turned into she more reformer or ruler? History remembers her by means of the identify she by no means gave herself, the extraordinary. It wasn't due to the fact she changed into ideal or kind or simply. It became due to the fact she took power and wielded it on her very own terms in a time and place wherein girls weren't supposed to have any. She failed to simply put on the crown. She rewrote what it's supposed to deserve one. Inside the humid depths of the Chiapas jungle in southern Mexico, the ruins of Palenque whisper testimonies from the ancient Maya International. Towering temples upward thrust above the canopy, their limestone faces eroded via time, but nevertheless brimming with secrets. And in 1994, one of those secrets revealed itself. A crew of Mexican archaeologists, led by way of Fanny Lopez Jimenez, turned into surveying Temple 3, a relatively modest pyramid next to the extra-famous Temple of the Inscriptions, the burial website of the amazing King PL the Tremendous. Temple the Throne wasn't expected to keep much until they observed something peculiar. A sealed hidden chamber underneath the structure. No looters had touched it. It became pristine. While the archaeologists broke via and lowered themselves internal, they determined a stone sarcophagus resting in silence. The air changed into heavy with the weight of centuries. As they opened the lid, crimson dirt rose like smoke, tremendous, stunning pink. The interior changed into blanketed in powdered cinnabar, a poisonous mercury sulfide used ceremonially by means of the mere. And lying inside that pink cloud became the skeleton of a girl. She had been buried with care and reverence. Her bones had been fragile but intact, her skull still sporting a jade mask, and her frame surrounded by airy services, necklaces, diadems, ear spools, all crafted from jade and shell. The whole thing, approximately the burial, screamed royalty. Yet no call changed into inscribed. No glyphs diagnosed her. It was one of the richest female burials ever discovered in Meso the Usa. But it became a complete enigma. Why turned into she buried in crimson powder? Who became she? Changed into she a queen, a priestess, or perhaps even Buddy's wife? The researchers known as her the Red Queen, and the name caught. However, regardless of present-day forensics, they could not say for positive who she changed into. Only that she had lived around the 7th century for the duration of the Golden Age of Palenque. Not like most Maya tombs, hers were hidden, untouched, and purposefully remoted. Her burial wasn't simply ceremonial. It was non-secular. This female wasn't meant to be remembered with words. She turned into intended to be remembered through ritual, through coloration, and through the thriller she left behind. The maximum haunting characteristic of the Pink Queen's tomb wasn't her jade jewelry, or the silence of the sealed chamber. It changed into the pink dust. A thick layer of powdered cinnabar blanketed everything. The sarcophagus, the partitions, her bones, even the services round her. It clung like blood to stone. To the Maya this changed into no twist of fate. Cinnabar, made from crushed mercury sulfide, changed into one of the maximum sacred and perilous materials in the historic International. Its vibrant purple shade wasn't just visually hanging. It symbolized blood, rebirth, and the existence pressure that related the human and divine realms. Crimson changed into sacred. It became the coloration of sunrise, of sacrifice, of life emerging from dying. And it wasn't just symbolic, it became spiritual. Covering the dead in cinnabar became a ritual meant to transform the body, maintaining it no longer for eternity, however for transition. In Maya notion, loss of life wasn't the stop. It turned into a passage, a crossing into any other cosmic layer. And so the Crimson Queen, whoever she become being organized no longer just for burial, however for deification. However, there is some other layer to this. Cinnabar is poisonous. Repeated exposure can result in mercury poisoning, tremors, hallucinations, even demise. The Mayor Probable did not apprehend the chemistry, however they felt its efficiency. It became unstable, powerful, dangerous. To bathe the corpse in it turned to claim this man or woman become no regular mortal. In Palenque very few were buried with cinnabar. Friend the Great, the robust king, whose pyramid dominates the website, become one. His body, like hers, turned into additionally saturated in the purple powder. That element alone drew speculation. Was the Red Queen his wife, his mom, or someone of same divine popularity? Her cranium were positioned on a layer of jaguar skin, some other sacred symbol. Around her bone needles, obsidian blades, and miniature jade collectible figurines hinted at rituals finished both for the duration of her existence or in her honor at death. Every part of her burial instructed a tale without words, a tale of strength cloaked in secrecy, a female prepared to cross into the underworld, now not in silence, however in rite, soaking wet within the color of sacrifice. Surrounding the Crimson Queen's purple sopping wet remains turned into a world of silence, damaged best through the gleam of jade, shell, and obsidian. Those were not mere adorns. They were offerings, every one cautiously chosen to accompany her on the journey to the Maya afterlife. The Sebulba. At her facets have been jade necklaces, heavy and cold, their polished surfaces still radiant after 300 years underground. Jade was not simply stunning. It becomes sacred. The Maya taken into consideration it a symbol of everlasting lifestyles. It represented the green of maize, the vitality of the jungle, and the breath of the gods. Handiest the elite were buried with jade. For the Red Queen, it covered her chest, wrists, and ears, a clean signal that in existence she wielded impact, perhaps even divine want. One of the maximum haunting items turned into the Jadirari mask positioned delicately over her face. Not like the golden loss-of-life mask of Egypt. This one turned into diffused, comprised of dozens of tiny mosaic tiles arranged to mimic the contours of her cranium. The mask served a ritual feature to protect the soul, to keep identity, and to provide her as divine inside the eyes of the gods. Scattered close to her bones were bone needles, obsidian blades, and shell artifacts. Those might have been tools of formality or symbols of her status as priestess, healer, or royal matriarch. One bone pin changed into engraved, faint but practical, a small echo of her voice lost to time. At her FD and along the rims of the tomb have been ceramic vessels, nevertheless sealed, probable once full of offerings. Meals, drink, or incense to preserve her spirit past dying. The Maya believed the afterlife turned into adventure, risky layered, packed with challenges. Those items weren't luxuries. They have been requirements. To modernize, the tomb feels intimate, not overloaded, but intentional. There was no gold, no chariots, no pomp. Simply gadgets chosen with religious weight. It was a map for the soul. Through those treasures, we glimpse how the Maya understood dying, not as finality, but as a transition of energy. The Purple Queen wasn't buried to be forgotten. She turned into being organized to ascend. For all the grandeur of her tomb, the Purple Queen left behind one haunting void. No name, no inscriptions adorned her sarcophagus. No glyphs at the walls diagnosed her. She was in reality a person effective. But who? From the moment her tomb became opened, students started seeking to join the dots. The maximum compelling theory that the Pink Queen turned into Zakbuar, the spouse of Kinich Janab Buddy, acknowledged these days as Pal the Awesome, the most famous ruler of Palanque. Zakbuar become more than just friend's consort. She became born into nobility and married into Palanque's royal dynasty at a young age. She bore as a minimum 3 sons, all of whom held high reputation, and she performed a key ceremonial function at some point of her husband's reign. If all and sundry will be buried with such honor, it turned into her. Assisting this concept changed into the tomb's area, just a few eft far from Buddy's own grand burial in Temple of the Inscriptions. The proximity shows a planned pairing, husband and spouse, rulers even in loss of life. After which there is the Cinnabar. Most effective burials in Palanque have been observed with such excessive Cinnabar insurance. Pal and the Crimson Queen. It is not likely this was twist of fate. However, right here's in which the mystery deepens. DNA exams have been performed on both units of stays in hopes of confirming the connection. But the outcome's inconclusive. The girl's bones showed no direct maternal hyperlink to Buddy, but that failed to rule out a spousal dating. In the end, marriage does not require shared blood. Some have argued she could have been Sukuk, Friend's powerful mother who ruled Palanque earlier than he came of age. Others propose she can also have been a excessive priestess or a sister or a royal ancestor whose call has truly been misplaced to records' erosion. Nevertheless, the proof factors maximum strongly to Tokuo, a queen through Identify, a mom of kings, and a religious counterpart to Pal. The lack of a name won't be an oversight. It could have been intentional. In Maya cosmology, the soul lived on now not through monuments, but through ritual, symbol, and the whispers of the earth. And so, the Purple Queen stays suspended between legend and truth, a female who ruled, remembered not in stone, however in scarlet and silence. To recognize the Purple Queen, we must apprehend the world she came from, a international where Maya girls, particularly royal ones, held extra impact than many recognize. In Maya civilization, politics changed into regularly a circle of relatives affair. Royal girls were not simply passive consorts. They have been diplomats, priestesses, and electricity agents. They carried out rituals, backed temples, and performed vital roles in preserving dynastic legitimacy. Their bloodlines were political capital used to forge alliances and secure claims to the throne. Take Sakuk, for example, the mom of Friend the Super. Whilst the throne of Palanque changed into left vacant, she took strength herself and dominated as queen regent till her son came of age. She wasn't a placeholder. She changed into a ruler in her very own proper, issuing decrees and overseeing production projects. Without her, Friend might also in no way have risen at all, and she or he wasn't an anomaly. Across the Maya International, in locations like Yakilan, Nonjo, and Calakmul, inscriptions show girls appearing principal ceremonies, conducting battle international relations, and sometimes ruling outright. They had been often portrayed in Scouse Borrow and work of art, wearing complex headdresses and regalia, standing beside kings as equals, or every now and then above them. Their words had been carved in glyphs. Their names have been remembered till they weren't. By the point Spanish conquistadors arrived centuries later, an awful lot of that reminiscence had eroded. The colonial lens saw local ladies as silent figures in a male-dominated global. However, the archaeology tells an extraordinary tale, one in every of complicated gender roles in which strength turned into negotiated, not simply inherited. This context casts the Crimson Queen in a new mild. She might not have ruled in call, but her burial, rich, sacred, and placed beside Pal suggests she turned into a significant pillar inside the royal order. Her jade masks wasn't just ornament. It became a symbol of identification, of energy held in life and protected in demise. Her bloodline might also have been the very glue that held Palanca's dynasty together. In Maya civilization, a queen wasn't just a queen. She became a keeper of sacred lineage, a voice in ceremony, and often the bridge between gods and men. The Pink Queen may be nameless, but in her global, she was never unvoiced. The Pink Queen wasn't simply buried with treasures. She became buried in architecture rich with purpose, layered with Maya cosmology, ritual symbolism, and intentional layout. Her tomb wasn't simply a grave, it was a gateway to eternity. Her frame was found interior Temple 1B3, one of the smaller pyramids in the heart of Palanque, yet its proximity to Temple of the Inscriptions, the resting vicinity of Friend the Exceptional, is telling. Those temples weren't constructed randomly. Their positioning became sacred, guided by using astrology, myth, and dynastic legacy. Temple the Thay rises modestly as compared to its grand neighbor. However, it hides something even greater intimate. A sealed crypt untouched by way of Lutters, flawlessly preserved. It changed into built deep in the temple's middle, handy simplest through a steep, slender staircase. The descent into her tomb feels nearly symbolic, a ritual journey downward into the underworld. The chamber itself is stark, product of reduced stone, sealed tightly for over 130 years. No glyphs or murals cowl the walls. No ornate carvings tell her tale. However, perhaps that silence is intentional. This changed into an area, now not for the living to interpret, but for the lifeless to convert. On the center, her sarcophagus sits like an altar made from limestone. It echoes the grand stone coffin of Pal round the corner. Even as Friend's lid is famously engraved with scenes of cosmic rebirth, the Red Queen's tomb is greater subdued. The point of interest is inward at the body, on the cinnabar, on the ritual of dying itself. But there are subtle architectural cues that hint at that means. The tomb is aligned east to west, a symbolic route mirroring the solar's adventure from life to dying. The chamber is small, however effective. It feels deliberate, private, a sacred enclosure for someone revered. Maya temples were cosmological tools, bridges between the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. To be buried in one was to be accelerated past the human realm. The Red Queen's everlasting domestic wasn't an afterthought. It turned into a cautiously built shrine, a place where undying have become transformation. Her bones relaxation in stone, her essence in cinnabar, and her legacy in the architecture itself. A temple that speaks without words, telling us she mattered. To the historic Maya, death wasn't the cease. It turned into a threshold, a sacred passage into the underworld called Sebulba. And for someone like the Red Queen, this crossing become now not most effective non-secular. It become political, cosmological, and deeply ritualized. Burial rituals have been carefully choreographed activities, rooted in fable, and supposed to manual the soul through the treacherous layers of the underworld. Maya texts and iconography tell us that Sabala turned into no peaceful afterlife. It became a maze of darkness, rivers of blood, trials, and gods of death. Most effective the ones nicely buried, ritually organized, and spiritually ready should make the journey efficiently. The Pink Queen become buried, wrapped in cinnabar, encased in stone, and surrounded by way of offerings, all signs of an elite burial. But there's more. The presence of bone needles and obsidian blades in her tomb hint at automobile sacrifice rituals. Probably symbolic tools representing rites she had achieved in lifestyles, or that have been reenacted at her burial to empower her spirit. Heraldry mask carefully assembled from jade tiles changed into now not absolutely decorative. It may have served as a non-secular vessel preserving her face and identification as she journeyed into the afterlife. In Maya belief, the face was a replicate of the soul, and the soul had to be diagnosed by using the gods. The ceramic vessels surrounding her may additionally have as soon as held chocolate, maize, water, or even polka to nourish her in the subsequent international. Different objects like stingray spines or shell trumpets may want to have represented non-secular tools, calls to the gods, or tokens of ritual verbal exchange. Burial wasn't just a goodbye, it changed into a metamorphosis. The Maya believed in cycles, death as seed, burial as planting, and the afterlife as rebirth. Kings and queens were frequently seen as earthly incarnations of gods, and in demise they back to those divine origins. The Red Queen, covered in the color of blood, entombed in a pyramid, and honored with services, became being organized for rebirth, no longer as a mortal, but as a being tied to the sacred order of the cosmos. Her burial wasn't the quit of her story. It turned into the beginning of her legend. Only a few steps far from the Crimson Queen's very last resting vicinity lies one of the maximum iconic tombs in Mesoamerica, that of Kinich Janab Budi, recognized clearly as Pal the Outstanding. His burial inside the Grand Temple of the Inscriptions is well known for its artistry, scale, and deeply non-secular symbolism. But what makes the Red Queen's tomb so outstanding isn't best what become inside, it is in which it become discovered. Her sarcophagus was hidden inside Temple 3, directly adjacent to Friend's monument. In a city like Palenque, in which each temple changed into carefully located to mirror cosmic standards, this closeness changed into no accident. It turned into intentional, a statement etched in stone. Many scholars trust the Red Queen was Zakbuo, Friend's queen, and depended on consort. While her tomb lacks inscriptions, the similarities between their burials are hanging, each wrapped in cinnabar, both entombed in pyramids, both buried with jade, and each treated with severe reverence. Those rituals mirror each different, as though two halves of a sacred narrative. Pal's lid famously depicts him falling into the underworld tree, a cosmic scene of loss of life and rebirth. The Red Queen's less complicated tomb consists of no such iconography, but the symbolism lies within the pairing itself. If Buddy represented the sun, journeying through the underworld at night to upward push again, then the Pink Queen may have represented the moon, the feminine pressure that follows its own mysterious course within the sky. Collectively they embodied a cosmic duality, masculine and female, king and queen, sun and moon, order and ritual. In Maya mythology, rulership was no longer singular, it was relational. Harmony within the cosmos required balance, and that stability extended into the dynastic court docket. Through putting the Purple Queen beside Friend, the Maya were preserving now not simply a wedding, but a cosmic partnership. Their proximity in dying may additionally have reflected their roles in existence. A queen no longer in the back of, however beside her king, sharing now not only a throne, but a legacy. In their tomes they communicate without phrases, two souls wrapped in cinnabar and stone joined across eternity, one among records' most sacred silences. Although her call become lost to time, the Purple Queen of Palenque endures no longer as a forgotten relic, but as one of the maximum enigmatic and powerful girls of the historical world. Her tomb, sealed for over 300 years, now whispers across centuries, inviting questions that echo louder with every discovery. She represents a mystery that still resists complete knowledge. We can also by no means recognize exactly who she turned into. No glyph carved her name, no stealer advised her tale, and yet the care in her burial, the richness of her services, the symbolism of her pink-drenched bones, all speak of a lady profoundly critical, not merely as a wife or consort. However, as someone who held actual have an impact on spiritual weight and royal blood. Nowadays, the Crimson Queen forces us to re-evaluate assumptions. She's a reminder that within the historical Maya International, ladies have been now not silent. They led rituals, governed towns, and shaped dynasties. While kings like Buddy have long taken the spotlight, the Pink Queen's reemergence reminds us that energy did now not belong to guys alone. It flowed via moms, queens, priestesses, and visionaries. Her legacy is extra than the treasures she left behind. It's the verbal exchange she started out amongst archaeologists, historians, artists, and storytellers. Every jade bead, every layer of cinnabar, each architectural desire and temple that tells us something deliberate. This female mattered, and possibly that's the maximum notable a part of her tale. No longer what we realize, but what we nonetheless don't. The Red Queen teaches us that history is not just a collection of information. It's a residing puzzle, a shared human longing to hook up with the beyond. In that feel, her legacy remains unfolding. She lies wrapped in crimson, the coloration of existence and sacrifice, of blood and rebirth. Her face, once hidden at the back of a jade mask, now stares again at us through technological know-how artwork and marvel. She stays nameless, but no longer voiceless. Mysterious, however, not forgotten. The Crimson Queen can also have ruled a nation in existence. However, in demise she regulations something extra, our creativeness. Her tomb became sealed in stone, her tale become written in silence. And still some way she speaks. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907 inside the colorful district of Coyoacan, then a village on the outskirts of Mexico metropolis. Her adolescence home, the Casa Azul, the blue residence, turned into filled with color, contradiction, and quiet strength. It later turned out to be a sanctuary, a battleground, and a museum to one of the maximum iconic artists of the 20th century. Freda was the .33 of 4 daughters born to Guillermo Kahlo, a German-Hungarian photographer, and Matilda Calderon, a devout Catholic of indigenous and Spanish descent. Her dad and mom have been opposites. Gamo, reserved and highbrow. Matilde, religious and emotionally remote. Freda could inherit her father's introspection and artistic eye, but also her mother's fierce resilience. As a toddler, Freda turned into imaginative, outspoken, and ambitious. She examined voraciously and requested questions maximum adults failed to need to reply. But on the age of 6, she shrunk polio, which left her proper leg thinner and weaker than the other. A bodily distinction she tried to mask with lengthy skirts, but never allowed to restriction her spirit. The contamination left her bedridden for months and isolated from different children. At some point of this time, she grew close to her father, who advocated her to work out, trip bicycles, and live mentally sharp. Not like most girls of her time, Freda didn't aspire to emerge as a spouse or a homemaker. Her purpose to grow to be a physician. She enrolled inside the prestigious country-wide preparatory college in Mexico metropolis at age 15. One among handiest a handful of ladies widespread. There she stood out not only for her intelligence, however, for her rebellious wit, radical thinking, and particular feel of favor. She joined a collection of young intellectuals known as the Cachuchas who debated philosophy, literature, and politics. Freda was interested in revolution, to ideas that challenged culture. However, even in the one's early years, earlier than the bus crash that could define her frame, and before the fame that might define her legacy, Frida Kahlo became already painting herself into the sector with sharp edges, unapologetic ideas, and an identification too massive to in shape interior all of us else's expectancies. She wasn't simply growing up in Kokan. She became getting ready to remake herself totally. On September 17, 1925, Frida Kahlo's existence became split in two. The lady she were and the woman she turned into forced to come to be. That afternoon, she boarded a wooden bus with her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Aras, after college. They were laughing, teasing every different, and in all likelihood arguing. Freda by no means did something halfway. However, moments later, the bus collided with a road vehicle, and in an instant, her destiny unraveled into ache, metallic and silence. The crash changed into awful. The road vehicle overwhelmed the bus against a wall, splintering wood, and flinging passengers. Freda changed into impaled by way of an iron handrail. It entered her left hip and exited via her pelvis. Her spinal column fractured in 3 places. Her proper leg shattered, her foot dislocated, her collarbone and ribs broke, her shoulder turned into dislocated, her stomach become pierced. She become just 18 years antique. A person covered her with a borrowed overcoat. A person else noticed her frame turned into glowing, not from blood, but from the gold powder she had been carrying in a pouch. It had exploded on impact, dusting her damaged form in what appeared like glittering ash. Freda was taken to the Purple Pass Clinic and underwent numerous surgical procedures over the following months. She spent weeks in a frame forged, flat on her returned, motionless, writhing with contamination and uncertainty. The destiny she'd imagined of becoming a medical doctor slipped further away with every passing day. However, in that stillness, something started out to stir. Her father gave her brushes. Her mom rigged a unique easel to grasp above her mattress. A replicate changed into placed on the canopy so she should see herself. And there, mendacity in plaster and soreness, Freda started out to colour. First out of boredom, then out of obsession. Her first subjects have been her own mirrored image, due to the fact she was all she had. However, what emerged wasn't arrogance. It was survival. The crash had broken her bodily, but it had also opened a door into her very own mind, her very own body, and eventually into the surreal language of ache and identity that might outline her art. The lady who wanted to heal others now started recovery herself, one brush stroke at a time. As Freda Kahlo lay encased in plaster and metal, a body combating itself with each breath, she commenced to colour. What began as a shape of therapy soon became a language, and that language became deeply non-public, brutally honest, and often tough to look at, which turned into precisely the factor. Freda failed to paint quite plant life or polite landscapes. She painted pain, her ache, physical, emotional, and existential. Her first topics had been self-pictures, not due to the fact she turned into useless, however, because, as she famously stated, "I paint myself because I'm so regularly by myself, and due to the fact I'm the problem I realize excellent." Her early works had been small in scale, painted on tin or wooden panels, stimulated by using Mexican ritos. Devotional artwork meant to inform stories of suffering and miracles. Freda became this subculture inward. Her frame became the canvas. Her emotions have become the altar. She painted herself as cut up, as pierced, as bleeding. In one painting, she is impaled by using nails like a current-day martyr. In any other, she floats in a barren panorama, tethered to a broken column, a metaphor for her shattered backbone. She painted herself weeping, fractured, decapitated, and bare, however in no way passive, usually looking. Her pain became no longer sanitized. She painted the ugliness of trauma with beauty, defiance, and even humor. Every piece changed into a reclamation of her frame, her experience, and her identity as a lady in a world that regularly attempted to define her. But Freda wasn't just telling her tale. She became inventing a brand new sort of visual narrative, one which mixed Mexican folk art, surrealism, clinical illustration, and symbolism. Her artwork became dreamlike autopsies of her soul, framed in coloration, way of life, and myth. By the time she recovered sufficient to walk once more, albeit painfully, Freda changed into not the lady who had desired to be a medical doctor. She turned into an artist, and her art became in contrast to anything all of us had seen. She had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and grew to become it right into a source of advent. Freda Kahlo did not just paint her ache, she made the world look at it, and in doing so she grew to become suffering into a sacred act of self-expression. In 1928, nonetheless getting better, nevertheless portray and just 21 years old, Freda Kahlo met the person who might emerge as the most profound and turbulent courting of her lifestyles, Diego Rivera. He changed into 20 years her senior, already Mexico's most famous painter. Big in each stature and presence, Rivera was a large of Mexican muralism, recognized for his sweeping, politically charged frescoes that told the tale of the Mexican people. Freda had seen his work earlier then. She well liked it. But now she desired his opinion of her work. She brought her artwork to him at the Ministry of Training, interrupting his scaffolded work to ask bluntly, "Do I have talent?" Diego took one look and stated, "Sure," and not just out of kindness. He identified in her something rare, an unfiltered voice, uncooked and unpretentious, complete of rage, irony, ache, and splendor. They started out a relationship that became as consuming as it became creative. Freda once said, I suffered accidents in my existence. One in which a road vehicle knocked me down. The alternative was Diego. They married in 1929, and strange pairing to outsiders. Diego, huge, untrue, politically famous. Freda, sharp-tongued, fiercely unbiased, already taking walks with a cane. Her dad and mom known as it a wedding among an elephant and a dove. Their bond became passionate, however chaotic. Diego supported her art and endorsed her boom as a painter, but he was also ad infinitum unfaithful, in spite of Freda's very own sister, Christina. Freda was devastated, and in Go Back, she took lovers of her very own, both males and females, which include rumored affairs with Leon Trotsky and painter Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939, then remarried 12 months later with different phrases. This time, Freda might maintain her autonomy, her domestic, her cash, her call. Their Twiddy marriage was less approximately traditional love, and greater about innovative partnership and mutual information. Despite the betrayals and the heartbreak, Diego remained a constant force in Freda's life. He challenged her. He wounded her, however he also believed in her as an artist, as a modern, and as a female who ought to redefine what portray can be. Collectively, they have been not non-violent, however they had been mythical. Within the 30s, Freda Kahlo followed Diego Rivera on adventure north to San Francisco, Detroit and Big Apple as he finished excessive, profile mural commissions. Those years abroad delivered her face to face with American industrialism, wealth, and the contradictions of capitalism, and that they left her with deep political discomfort. Freda changed into a proud Mexican nationalist, a committed communist, and an admirer of indigenous traditions. The opulence she witnessed inside the United States of America, especially whilst the splendid melancholy ravaged a good deal of the United States of America, most effective deepened her experience of disillusionment. In Letters Home, she mocked the way of life's materialism and obsession with appearances. She overlooked the grit, shade, and contradiction of Mexico. At the same time as Diego painted huge murals on factory walls, Freda began to paint smaller, quieter revolutions, deeply personal works on tin and canvas. Her style solidified, sharp, surreal, emotional, and intimate. It became at some point of this time that she produced some of her maximum iconic self-portraits. Freda did not simply paint herself for conceitedness. She painted herself to live to tell the tale. Her identification have become her landscape, with her body constantly in ache from her twist of fate, multiple surgical procedures, and a failed pregnancy in Detroit. She grew to become inward. Her photographs confirmed her bleeding, fragmented, uncovered. But her face was usually calm, constantly direct, unapologetic. Certainly one of her maximum powerful works, Henry Ford Clinic, suggests her mendacity on a medical institution mattress, crying, surrounded by way of floating symbols of loss. A fetus, a snail, medical gadget, a cracked pelvis. It was uncooked, photograph, and deeply emotional. A canvas that bled with truth. Back in Mexico, Freda immersed herself in leftist politics. She and Diego welcomed Leon Trotsky into their domestic while he lived in exile. Freda wore Tijuana dresses, traditional indigenous garments, no longer just as style, however as a political and cultural declaration. Her art changed into, in no way disconnected from her beliefs, her identification, her frame, and her ideology all intertwined in her paintings. Whilst Rivera became portrait murals of revolution, Freda painted its human fee, the frame in portions, the thoughts on fireplace, and the self always staring again. In exile and in illness, she became no longer just a painter of pain, but a painter of resistance. While Freda Kahlo returned to Mexico inside the overdue 30s, she was not just Diego Rivera's wife. She had become something else entirely, a pressure, an artist whose work radiated with uncooked honesty, surreal symbolism, and cultural identification. Back in her place of birth, she stepped absolutely into herself. Her Casa Azul in Coyoacán had become a sanctuary of shade and contradiction. Brilliant cobalt partitions, yellow trim, Aztec statues inside the garden, monkeys and parrots wandering freely. The house became a dwelling extension of Freda's imagination. It was a blend of way of life and riot, elegance and earth. Right here she surrounded herself with pre-Columbian artifacts, exotos, folk artwork, and modern books. She wore bold Tijuana clothes, wove flora into her hair, and painted amid the scent of copal incense and the sounds of mariachi on the road outside. This era marked an explosion of creativity. Her artwork became more difficult, extra symbolic, and extra-political. Works like the two Fredas found out a divided self. One in You Get Dressed with a Bleeding Heart, the other in indigenous clothing, robust and composed. It changed into Freda's visible autobiography, a portrait of affection, loss, and heritage. In 1939, she exhibited her paintings in Paris, where artists like Picasso, Breton, and Kandinsky praised her fiercely unique style. However, even the various surrealists, Freda stood aside. Whilst André Breton attempted to label her as one among their very own, she driven lower back. "The idea I was a surrealist," she said. "However, I wasn't. I in no way painted goals. I painted my very own fact." She painted Mexico, now not the romantic postcard version, however the dwelling, breathing United States she cherished. Her paintings pulsed with symbolism. Skeletons, hummingbirds, hearts, thorns, corn, and blood. She venerated the indigenous roots of her fatherland at the same time as unmasking the violence of its past and gift. However, whilst her artistic voice grew more potent, her health persevered to say no. Multiple surgical procedures, infections, and chronic pain have become day-by-day realities. Still, she painted through it, propped up in bed, torso certain in corsets, palms clenched round the brush. Freda had back to Mexico, no longer to rest, but to reclaim her power via paint, through politics, and via her fearless embrace of the self. As the 1940s wore on, Freda Kahlo's body persisted to betray her. Her backbone turned into deteriorating. Her right leg became continuously inflamed. She underwent greater than 30 surgical procedures in her lifetime, regularly in grueling succession. At instances, she became bedridden for months, encased in body casts, or immobilized by using traction devices that stretched her bones apart. However, nevertheless, she painted. Every canvas during those years became both a release and an act of resistance. Her works grew darker, greater, defiant. She painted with a clarity sharpened through pain, refusing to cover behind metaphor. In the damaged column, she affords herself split down the middle, her frame pierced with nails, a cracked ionic column replacing her spine. Yet her face is stoic, her gaze unflinching. Ache for Freda changed into now not simply a topic. It turned into her associate, her antagonist, her muse. Her political voice additionally grew louder. She joined the Mexican Communist birthday party, marched in demonstrations, wrote fiery letters, and referred to as out imperialism and injustice. Whilst her fitness not allowed her to walk, she regarded at protests in a wheelchair, defiantly keeping symptoms and shouting slogans. In 1953, Freda changed into given her first solo exhibition in Mexico, a long overdue birthday party of her art. But her fitness turned into so fragile. Medical doctors told her she couldn't attend. So she did what best Freda might do. She arrived by means of ambulance, carried in on a stretcher, and placed in the center of the gallery on her hospital bed. Wearing traditional finery, surrounded by means of her very own work, she greeted guests with tequila, laughter, and that fire nonetheless burning in her eyes. Her very last paintings were both childlike and harrowing. In Marxism will deliver fitness to the unwell. She painted herself sporting a steel corset cradled by using the fingers of Marx, casting away symbols of oppression. Her closing recognized paintings was a nevertheless existence of sliced watermelons. One piece bearing the phrases, "Viva la vida," lengthy stay lifestyles. Even within the face of demise, she remained defiant, happy, and political. Freda Kahlo's closing snapshots weren't simply self-graphics. They were acts of revolution, painted in ink, however continually signed with existence. On July 13, 1954, on the age of 47, Freda Kahlo died inside the same vicinity she was born, La Casa Azul in Coyoacán. The reliable cause was indexed as a pulmonary embolism. But those closest to her whispered of something deeper. She were ill, sure, however also exhausted by pain, by means of surgeries, by means of the long battle together with her personal frame. Simply days earlier than she had attended a political protest in opposition to the CIA coup in Guatemala. Vulnerable and wheelchair-certain, she insisted on going, her clenched fist raised within the air. Revolution remained her final heartbeat. Her last diary entry became brief but piercing. "I am hoping the exit is comfortable, and I desire by no means to go back." Freda's funeral turned into held at the Palacio de Bellas Artes, Mexico's maximum prestigious cultural institution. Her body, draped within the red flag of the Mexican Communist Party, became watched over with the aid of friends, family, artists, and revolutionaries. Diego Rivera changed into inconsolable. he referred to as her the best love of his life, even as his betrayals had almost broken her. But inside the years that followed her loss of life, something wonderful passed off. Frida Kahlo refused to disappear. At the beginning, her name became whispered most effective in art circles. Her works were not easy to categorize, too political for surrealists, too surreal for traditionalists. However, slowly her picture, her tale, and her defiance started out to resonate. Via the 1970s and 80s, as feminist students and activists reclaimed forgotten voices, Frida's have become louder. She wasn't just a painter anymore. She became a symbol of pain was beauty, of feminism born through resistance, of Mexican identity celebrated without apology, of queerness in capacity, revolution, and authenticity. Her face, unibrow gaze, plants in her hair have become iconic. Her home became a museum. Her diary have become a sacred text, and her artwork now hang within the world's finest museums. Frida Kahlo had lived plenty of her life in Diego's shadow. However, in loss of life, she progressed. She didn't just depart in the back of artwork. She left in the back of a reflect and dared us all to appearance. Now not with pity, now not with worry, however with hearth. Today, Frida Kahlo's face is anywhere. Revealed on shirts, painted on work of art, become dolls, memes, posters, and icons. Her signature unibrow, her flower-topped hair, her direct gaze. All right away recognizable. But what makes her legacy effective is not just that people understand her face, is that they recognize the truth at the back of it. Frida didn't attempt to be perfect. She failed to fit into containers. She wasn't conventional, and she did not care to be. In a world that demands perfection, she gave us realness. Raw, messy, colorful, indignant, glad, contradictory realness. She celebrated what made her exceptional. Her disability, her queerness, her politics, her way of life, and turned it into artwork that transcended borders and many years. She's grown to be more than an artist. She's a worldwide image of defiance, feminism, cultural satisfaction, and creative resistance. For queer groups, she's a fearless bisexual icon who lived openly and unapologetically in a time that demanded silence. For ladies, she's a reminder that energy doesn't require permission. For disabled artists, she's evidence that ache can gas the calm, not stop it. And for Mexico, she's a daughter reclaimed, fierce, folkloric, and forever part of the countrywide soul. Her artwork, once dismissed as too extraordinary or too non-public, are actually a number of the maximum respected in the global. Works just like the two Frida's self-portrait, with thorn necklace and hummingbird, and the broken column aren't simply seen. They're felt deeply by using anybody who has ever suffered and wished to turn that struggling into something sacred. She lived within the margins and became them into center stage. She embraced contradiction. A communist who wore gold, a woman betrayed who cherished once more, a frame in pieces with a soul unbreakable, and through it all, she painted, not simply with color, however with conviction. Frida Kahlo in no way asked to be a symbol. She absolutely advised the reality about herself, and in doing so, told the truth for millions of others who had never seen themselves meditated in art earlier than. Now whilst we see her face, we see braveness, we see color, we see resistance, we see Frida not long gone however immortal.